Hey there, fellow travelers. Welcome to the Tolkien Road, episode 349. In this episode, we're continuing our journey through the fall of Númenor by exploring the start of Sauron's open war against the Elves of Eregion. Before we get started, I'd like to give a double up air five to our amazing fellowship. Stick 'em up, fellowship. 3, 2, 1. Whoopsht. Boom. Thank you. Special thanks to this episode's executive producers, John R., Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, Jacob Lockham, John H., Melkor27, and KG. Also, a shout out to those celebrating their fellowship anniversary in September or October of 2023. Catherine, Tom S., Cherie R., Stephanie B., John W., Alan C., Dustin Q., Robert S., Melkor27, Eugene D., James L., Ken P., Samuel B., Red Hawk, and Alex S. Thank you all so much for sticking with us over the years. Join the Fellowship of the Road by visiting patreon.com/TolkienRoad. When you join the Fellowship of the Road, it helps us to keep on evering on and lands you some cool perks along the way. Learn more at patreon.com/TolkienRoad. If you're watching, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know what's on your mind in the comments below. Finally, attention binge listeners, subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes or the platform of your choice. If you are a 5-star fan of the Tolkien Road, you can really help us out by heading over to iTunes or your preferred source for the show and dropping us a rating and review. When you do that, it helps get the word out about the Tolkien Road, which helps us to keep on evering on. All right. So with this episode, the War of Sauron upon the Elves, and what we might also call the War of the Three Rings, begins. And given the relative length of the next 3 chapters, as well as their unified theme, I decided to combine them into this one episode. So the chapters we'll be looking at are 1693, War of the Elves and Sauron begins. The Three Rings are hidden. 1695, Sauron's forces invade Eriador. Gil-galad sends Elrond to Eregion. And 1697, which has a rather epic title, Eregion laid waste, death of Celebrimbor, the gates of Moria are shut, and Elrond retreats with a remnant of the Noldor and founds the Refuge of Imladris. The original sources for this chapter are primarily of the Rings of Power and the Third Age and Unfinished Tales. As far as the ruler of Númenor, currently the ruler of Númenor is still Tar Telperion, who is the second ruling queen of Númenor. She had a quite long rule, and very many important things happened during her rule. But her rule is actually starting to kind of wane now. It's kind of getting into its twilight years. So she will not be queen a whole lot longer. So the last chapter we discussed had to do with the year 1600 of the Second Age. So we are beginning this chapter really 93 years later. And as I said last chapter, it took Sauron 90 years to prepare for war, from kind of the time when the elves really were onto him, finally, wake up to the fact that, oh, this is Sauron and he's out to get us. He's out to control us, out to wield power over us with this whole ring technology. They didn't immediately attack when he fled back to Mordor, and he spent the next 90 years preparing for war, preparing for open war on the elves. Of course, Númenor had been preparing for that, but we won't hear a lot about Númenor in this particular episode. This is more focused on Sauron and the early part of his battle, of his war against the elves, and especially the elves of Eregion. So in 1693, it really all begins with Sauron and his complaint about wanting the elvish rings back. He says they could not have attained to their making without his lore and counsel. And so let's kind of read a bit more from the context here. It says, "But Sauron, finding that he was betrayed and that the elves were not deceived, was filled with wrath, and he came against them with open war, demanding that all the rings should be delivered to him, since the elven smiths could not have attained to their making without his lore and counsel. But the elves fled from him, and 3 of their rings they saved and bore them away and hid them." So, Sauron here is complaining because he says, the elves could not have really created these 3 rings without his aid. They couldn't have created any of the rings they created, and there was lots of rings they created, right? We know about the 3, the 7, and the 9. We don't. We don't know of any others specifically, but we get the general sense that there was a lot of rings, sort of this magical ring technology that was created by the elves of Eregion. But the three elvish rings, are kind of the high point of their technology. And it's funny because Sauron, might almost argue that he's got like a filing like a patent claim or like a copyright claim, right? It's like, I was the one that gave you the idea for this. I was the one that taught you how to create things like this. It's almost like it just pops into my mind. It reminds me of like the stories of the early days of the PC, right? And I don't know, I don't know a whole lot about that history other than just kind of the general sketch of it. But my understanding is, the Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and those folks were all kind of knew each other and maybe even worked together early on, and Steve Jobs and and I think Steve Wozniak, they start Apple, and they start creating these personal computers, and then Bill Gates kind of spins things off, and maybe he's friends with them, or maybe he was even part of the business, I'm not sure. But he kind of spins things off and, of course, creates Windows, and Microsoft really takes off. And for a while, Microsoft is much bigger, than Apple, kind of in the later part of the 80s and into the early 90s, until Apple really starts to make a big comeback. But it kind of strikes me as funny because it's like Bill Gates with Windows. I could see Steve Jobs being like, that was my idea, and you took that, because the operating system for the Mac originally was kind of where the blueprint for Windows came from. So anyway, just a funny little analogy here, but Sauron really spins it into, what I would call the art of propaganda. You've done me an injustice. And last episode, I talked about how if you study like the great aggressors of history, they often do things like this, especially in the modern age where propaganda is so important. And, being able to kind of like justify yourself in the eyes of the rest of the world is so important. The Nazis were really masters at this in the early part of World War II. They everything was an injustice against them and the German people, and they were just taking doing what was just. They were working against the true aggressors, and all the while they just invade, rape, pillage, wherever they go. They're fighting back against the true injustice, the true aggressors. And I totally kind of read that into Sauron and his complaint here. You stole this technology from you. Yes, this same technology I was going to use to secretly dominate you and read your thoughts. How dare you, right? It's pretty funny to me. And I think it's something that we, when we are thinking about the kinds of people we should trust, when we're thinking about people who are in positions of power and whether they are, worthy leaders or whether they are like kind of con men in those roles, we should ask ourselves, how do they, are we able to kind of decipher their propaganda, right? Are they being straight shooters, or are they doing stuff like this? Because it's pretty rare that somebody ever comes out and is just like, I want to kill you, or I want to dominate you. Instead, they'll come out with some thing that's kind of like, hey, here's this thing that's going to benefit you. Just accept it, and maybe I'll even teach you a little bit about how to do it. And it'll be all good. Nothing to worry about, right? And then it turns out, there's a catch, right? There's sometimes it always seems like there's always a catch, right? But I'm not totally entirely cynical about power in that way, but I'm pretty cynical. I'm not like a absolutely cynical, I guess you could say, but I am pretty cynical, and just because of the capacity for man and the story of history, for men in positions of power to do evil to other men, I just like, along with Tolkien, I think it's very rare that you find a man, a human being that is truly worthy and capable of wielding power and authority justly, and well. And I think, I don't have the exact quote, but I think he says at some point, it's very rare to find somebody just that's qualified. It's extremely rare, probably never happens, that somebody who actually wants that power is worthy of it, right? Which is something that's pretty telling to me. It's like when somebody's like, again, I'm not going to be an absolutist about that idea, but I think it's insightful nevertheless. It's like the people who are standing up and being like, "Oh, I would be a great leader." It's kind of like, yeah, maybe you've got some qualities, but probably that's the worst sign, is that you're saying I would be a great leader. So I digress. Anyway, Sauron wants the Elvish rings back. The 3 elven rings, what are they? What are they called? So let's review. We have Narya, Ninya, and Vilya. So Narya, Ninya, and Vilya. We spoke about Ninya some last week, because this is the ring that Galadriel takes possession of when I believe is it Celebrimbor flees to Lothlorien. I guess before he returns later back to Eregion, he gives her Ninya, and this is the ring of water. And then Narya and Vilya. Narya is the ring of fire, and Vilya is the ring of air. And these 2 rings go to Gil-galad and back in Lindan. So the powers of these rings, they could ward off the decays of time and postpone the weariness of the world. This is really the big proposition for the elves, that they want to postpone the weariness of the world, ward off the decays of time. They want to create kind of an undying land, just like Valinor is an undying land. So they want to create Valinor in this part of the world, in what we know of as Middle Earth. The keepers of these rings did not use them openly, while Sauron had the ruling ring. That's the deal, right? As long as Sauron was wearing the ring, when he was wearing the ring, he could read their thoughts if they were wearing the ring, right? That's the big danger of them. So they don't wear them at this time while he's wielding it, but that's probably why they are wearing, like Galadriel wears Ninya later on in the Lord of the Rings, because Sauron doesn't actually have possession of the ruling ring at that point. So it also says that the 3 rings, while they used the technology, the techne that Sauron had taught the Elvish smiths, they were untouched by him and therefore unsullied by evil. So in a way, the other rings that have been created were created with Sauron. These were created using the technology he had given the elves, but we could almost say it's like a technology that they had further developed on their own. Okay, so they are not used for the same evil purpose. They have not been used for evil purpose to this point, and so they're unsullied by evil. They don't have any of Sauron himself within them. So they've got that going for them. All right, and it says that from 1693 on, war never ceased between Sauron and the elves. So Sauron, at this point, he basically has declared himself openly. He is no longer hiding the fact that he wants to dominate and possibly even destroy the elves, and he has nothing but hatred for them from here on out. All right. Move forward 2 years to 1695. Sauron invades Eriador. So let's go to our map, and we can investigate how he does this. All right, so our trusty map of Middle Earth. So this invasion, we look at the map here, and we can see Mordor to the southeast, Eriador to the northwest, kind of the polar opposites on this map here. And so how does Sauron get with his forces to Eriador? Because we have this huge chain of mountains we know as the Misty Mountains and then the White Mountains that really divide the land in half here. Almost run up and down like a backwards S, like a spine, right? So what's the deal? How does he journey with a large army from Mordor all the way to Eriador? Well, he's going to pass through the Gap of Rohan, right? So at this time, it's not called Rohan. It will be called Rohan for a very long time. Another, just rough math, won't be called Rohan for another, 3,000 years or so. And that is all, a story we'll talk about. We've talked about it in the past on this show, and we'll talk about it at a later time, of course, especially as we get into closer to the release of the War of the Rohirrim film. But yeah, he journeys through this region of that's now called Rohan, but at that time was called Kalanarthan, and he journeys through the Gap of Rohan and comes up through Dunland, and that's when he arrives at Eregion near the Moria Gate, right here. If you can kind of see where I'm drawing that line right there. Boop. Oh yeah, there we go. Little tool for you to maybe highlight it a little better. So he marches with his armies. Perhaps that's why it's not until 1695 that he gets there, because he has to march with a large army across a fairly vast distance. It's wars back then took a little longer because they didn't have automobiles and trains to move them around. So they just had to do the good old fashioned march all the way there. So 1695, Sauron invades Eriador, and he attacks Eregion Holland first. We might think of this as, this would be the most natural thing that he needs to attack. You might argue like, well, why didn't he maybe just bypass that and go straight into the heart of Eriador if he wanted to overrun Eriador, right? Was Eregion there with a huge army? My thought is that his mindset was, if I go here, then if I go straight into the heart of Eriador, or head straight for even Lindon here, maybe Lindon, it's there near the coast, there's the Númenorians to worry about. Lindon might be a more populous elvish realm at that point. It's led by Gil-galad. So in that, of course, if you go and attack, and then you leave your rear open to attack from the elves of Eregion. And really, it does seem that his goal was to get these 3 elvish rings back, right? He wanted to get the elven rings back. That's his purported goal in all of this. And I kind of, I wonder, like, why was he so, like, were they a danger to him? Was that why he wanted them back, or was he simply jealous? I don't know. It's interesting to me that this is his move. He seems very motivated by repossessing these 3 elven rings, or just possessing them, even though I really don't think he has a claim to them. He seems bent on this. Maybe he was hoping he would get the 3 elven rings back, and then he could kind of convince the elves to be subservient to him, because we have to remember, Sauron wasn't. So, like, think of Sauron at the end of Lord of the Rings, and if you actually read the end of the book, it's really interesting how Sauron is portrayed there, because we tend to think in like these kind of extremes of our of like evil, like we think of evil figures, and it's like they're going to kill everyone, right, and nuke the whole planet, right? And it's like, well, Sauron just kind of wanted to dominate everybody. He just wanted to kind of be the biggest leader. And I'm not saying he would have been a good one. He would have been an awful one, complete tyrant. And no one would have wanted that. But, there's ways in which he makes it, the mouth of Sauron at the end of Lord of the Rings, he makes it sound appealing in ways, right? It's like, why continue with this war? Just surrender, and we can make arrangements, right? And I'll be in charge, but I'll rule justly, right? Or I'm paraphrasing here, but he does not like just come right out and say, I'm going to murder everybody, right? It's really kind of odd. Like you think of what the Nazis did with killing, like, just that kind of this like hellbent plan of extermination for entire groups of people. And I mean, that's not as common in world history, like that sort of motive, as the motive of, I'd like to merely dominate these people and make them like my slaves or just subservient. You kind of think about how the Roman Empire did it. Well, Rome was, Rome's goal was to, conquer you militarily and then rule you and kind of keep you pacified, right? Keep you happy, and keep you feeding into their civilization. Anyway, again, I'm digressing here. But it's very interesting to me to think about what Sauron's motivation here is. And I'll say again, like, it's just such a bummer to me that we're never going to have like actual books on these big events of the Second Age, right? I mean, how amazing would the War of the Three Rings have been as a like epic saga, right? Beginning in the year 1693, or maybe beginning a few years before that, as Sauron is building up to war. And then, we get this whole saga about how the war unfolds and the aftermath of the war. And that's just one big tale of the Second Age. So it's something I think would have been just truly fascinating to see how Tolkien would have told that story. So yeah, Sauron journeys through the Gap of Rohan, up into towards Eregion, and he attacks Eregion. Elrond's force meets him there. So Elrond has come from Lindan with his own force, and he goes out. His force meets Sauron at Eregion, and Celeborn leads a sortie that drives them back. So Celeborn, the husband of Galadriel, is still in Eregion at this time, and he leaves a sortie that drives back the kind of vanguard of Sauron's forces. But it only buys them a little time, and unfortunately, Eregion is lost. Eregion is lost as no ruling force that Sauron comes with, and though they can hold them back a bit to buy time, eventually Eregion is lost. And in 1697, it says that Eregion is laid waste. We learn about Sauron coming to the house of the Myrdain, and those are the jewelsmiths, the elvish jewelsmiths who created the rings of power. And Celebrimbor himself attempts to withhold Sauron at the doors of the house of the Myrdain, but he is taken captive. And Sauron takes the 9 rings and the lesser works of the Myrdain, but cannot find the 3 or the 7. And unfortunately, Celebrimbor is captured, tortured, and killed. He reveals the location of the 7 dwarf rings, but not the 3 elven rings. So he's able to withstand to death the torture that is trying to get him to reveal the location of the 3 elven rings. Sauron guesses that Galadriel and Gil-galad have the 3 elven rings, and so we kind of get the sense of where he's probably going to be heading next. I think it's also interesting to me that we don't hear much about Sauron's attack upon Lorien. If we just go back to the map, before he would even have to cross the Gap of Rohan, he does not even bother with this area. And maybe his thought here is the Misty Mountains. I mean, there's really not much here, but as I think about it more and more, and just like kind of the way that the order of the war unfolds, it's really fascinating to consider why it unfolds the way it does. Because again, like you're like, well, if Galadriel's here, and this is like, this is a holdout against Mordor, then why doesn't he take them on first? And maybe it's because he would have had to go up here. He's not going through Moria because that's under the mountains and it belongs to the dwarves, and that probably would have been a bloodbath against against Sauron's armies if he had attempted that. So if he goes up here and he attacks Lorien, then he's probably victorious. But then he gives the people of Eriador plenty of time to prepare for his coming, over here. And so he basically holds this region, and then you have like East Middle Earth and West Middle Earth, essentially, right? So that's perhaps why he doesn't even bother with the region of Lorinand, as it's called at that time, but instead takes his war to Eregion. So Celebrimbor tortured and killed, and really this is pretty messed up, right? Sauron uses Celebrimbor's lifeless body as a banner as he attacks Elrond's forces. Yeah, let's look at this. Let's look at this image here. This is pretty horrendous, right there. There you go. Celebrimbor shot through with arrows, hoisted upon a spear, and his body is used as a banner. So these are the kinds of banners that Sauron uses, which tells you a lot about him. Elrond is almost overrun, but the dwarves of Khazad-dûm attack Sauron's forces from the rear with additional aid from Amroth's elves from Lorinand. And so we might suppose that Amroth's elves come through Moria from Lorinand, and so they're able to assist. So essentially, think of it. Maybe we can zoom in on our map here. If we look a little more closely at Eregion, so here's Lorinand, here's the Moria gate. So the mines of Moria are here. Here's Eregion. By this time in 1697, Sauron is pushing Elrond's forces further and further north, and so the dwarves come out of Moria and attack Sauron from the rear, along with the forces of Amroth from Lorinand. Elrond, now this does succeed in saving Elrond, allowing him and the remnant of Eregion to escape with their lives. So Elrond escapes northward and establishes Imladris as kind of a stronghold, Rivendell, of course, not really too far from here. Following the reverse course, we might say, of the Fellowship at the beginning of Lord of the Rings. And Sauron does succeed in beating back the dwarves, who retreat into their Moria stronghold. And all orcs were therefore commanded to harry dwarves wherever they might from then going forward. So that is the story of kind of the first part of the War of the Three Rings, the War of Sauron upon the Elves. Pretty momentous things, pretty interesting happenings there. Let's take a look at some of the sketches, some of the images from this chapter. We already looked at the image of Celebrimbor as Sauron's banner. We go all the way back to the beginning, and we have what I believe is Eregion, and then we see Eregion in ruin, and Sauron leading his forces in battle, looking pretty intimidating there. And then Celebrimbor's last stand at the House of the Myrddin. All right. So what are the key takeaways from this chapter? Well, first of all, I'd say Celebrimbor pays the price of miscalculating trust. We've talked about this a lot on this podcast. It's important to really understand who it is you're trusting, who it is you're giving your trust to, what motivates them. Are they truly trustworthy? I place a high premium in trust. When it has come to my kids, that's kind of how I communicate things to them. It's like, just remember, trust is an extremely valuable thing, and when you break trust, it's extremely hard to earn it back. And I want them to understand that, like, if you can't trust a person, then you need to be very careful about your affiliation with them, right? You need to be extremely cautious and careful. In the case of realizing, and I just wonder, like, I know, surely Sauron is, being this powerful spiritual being, he is capable of figuring out how to get people to trust him. And the best con artists often are. That's why they call them artists, right? Con artists. They get your confidence, right? They are masterful geniuses at gaining your confidence, so that they can wield power over you. But Celebrimbor pays the price for miscalculating the trust here. I mean, I'm not saying that to necessarily blame Celebrimbor, to call him stupid or anything like that, but he does ultimately pay the price in this way. And then, with the Elves of Eregion vanquished, Sauron stands poised to overrun Eriador, and that's where we leave off. Next time, we'll take a look at the next major events in the War of the Three Rings, including the intervention of Númenor to turn the tide. All right. As always, keep the correspondence coming. We'll do our best to respond to you somehow and at some point. I know it's been a while since we've done a correspondence episode. I think we need to do some correspondence episodes coming up here soon. We've been hitting the fall of Númenor pretty hard for a while now, and it'll be nice maybe for me too to just take a break and field some questions. So many great comments and questions that we get via email and then YouTube comments and otherwise. So I think we'll probably do some correspondence episodes coming up here in the not too distant future. So keep that correspondence coming. TrueMythsPress.com. Don't forget to stop by TrueMythsPress.com for great merch like super styling and comfy Tolkien Road t-shirts, Two Trees camper mugs, and signed copies of my books. Once again, that's TrueMythsPress.com. Thanks for supporting our work with your purchase. All right. Thank you to our amazing patrons, especially the following: John R., Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, Jacob Lockham, John H., Melkor27, KG, Emilio P., Jonathan D., Robert H., Paul D., Julia, Werty, JoeBagelMan, Richard K., Matt R., Matthew W., John W., Eugene D., Chris B., Daniel S., Seb M., Corey C., Carolyn S., Emil K., Ms. Anonymous, Andrew T., Red Hawk, Shannon S., Brian O., Zeke F., James L., Chris L., Aja V., Ish of the Hammer, Teresa C., David of Pints with Jack, Eric B., and Alaskan Moose 31. Thank you all so much. We truly appreciate our patrons. And thank you all so much to everybody for watching and or listening. We will talk at you next time. Bye-bye.